morning. Once again, welcome to the Collective here on WSME Enlightenment Radio. My name is Michelle Turner, and I have the good fortune of being its host. Today, we're going to look at mental health, but in a different way. In the respect that last month was Mental Health Month, and I like to examine what that means for the African American community and what that looks like, and the different ways that we as a community are tackling the issue of mental health. So, in my green room waiting, I have the Reverend Odell Cooper, or I should say, Odell Montgomery Cooper, who is the executive producer and writer of the play production Interruptions. And she's moved on from that part of the story to bring interruptions to people in different ways. And we're going to discuss that. And also, there's a podcast called Interruptions. And with that, she has a partner in Kathy Patton. And Kathy is someone who has 40 years of experience in the field of human services. And she also has worked with youth. She's a wife, she's a mom, and she's also someone who is a very important part of the Interruptions podcast. So without further ado, I bring into the room Reverend Odell Cooper and Kathy Patton. Good morning, ladies. Thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate you.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. You're going to try to get to Odell to smile because this is not necessarily her hour of the day. So I just had to throw that out there.
She's going to be so grateful.
She's going to be wonderful.
She's going to be so grateful later on.
By the end of the day. So, Reverend Odell, bring us briefly to your charge, if you will. I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you mentioned in that sometimes certain things find people. You're not necessarily looking for them.
Yes.
And your interruptions, so to speak, was born out of a true interruption in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Your son was brutally murdered, and you had to do a self-discovery through that. So give us a teeny bit of that, just to give background as to how interruptions came about. And you're a brain aneurysm survivor.
Yes, thank you. So, yes, that was the beginning of the interruptions. And regardless of my education, my zip code, my professional status, I was not aware of the mental health issues that were going on inside of me. And because I ignored them, because I didn't know they were there, I suffered a brain aneurysm. And I was the only one that thought I was going to return to work in a month. And my doctor, after a year of struggling to reclaim myself, my doctor said, you need to reinvent yourself because the life and career that you had for the last 50 years, you cannot return to. He says, so find something to do that you can share your ministry, that you can continue to help others, and to do something different. So I had no idea that it meant, doing a play, being a podcaster, and writing this mental health program that we did. When I go back and talk to him, he said, that's not what I meant when I said reinvent yourself. He said, but okay. So it was basically, I am spiritual, my faith, so God driven. And my faith led me here. How do I continue to help others be able to recognize mental health issues in their life that we don't realize, to rely on their faith, and to find a life and move forward?
Was it a shock to you in the respect that you thought this was something you could handle after time? was it one of those things where you said, okay, this has happened to me. I'm going to be fine. I'll get some therapy and it will just kind of float through my life.
Well, the coop side of me, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to be fine. My daughter said no. She says, if you're going to do the podcast, you need somebody to be on the podcast with you. And Kathy is her favorite. Kathy has saved this family more times than not. And I called Kathy and we talked about it. She said, absolutely. So it was great. We banter with each other. We go to the same church. We're friends. She wears the other sorority colors. But we have this kindred.
See, I wasn't going to bring that up.
But we have
I wasn't going to bring that up.
But we have this kindred spirit and love for children, for youth, for our community and our faith. So it was Kathy.
But Kathy, why? Besides all of the wonderful accolades Odell just gave you, what was it that made you say, okay, I'll do this?
Thank you for asking that question, because I was on that journey with Odell, and so I saw what she went through, and for her to be able to sit and then write her story out. So not even so much the production, of course, that's awesome that she was able, to write a production, but just to see that she moved through her journey in such a mindful way. And when I mean that, she recognized the points at which she was every step of the way. And even, and I know we'll talk about this hopefully a little bit later, but even for her to be able to recognize that some things that people were saying to her were not healthy. And not meaning to do that, but just things that if you don't know how to deal with someone that's going through trauma, some things we say are just not, you want to say, yeah, that's not what you might want to say to that person, right? But she took it, she received it with dignity, but also was able to repel it. And I think that came from a lot of areas. It came from obviously her training, but also her faith in God and in herself to be able to get through this trauma that she hasn't gone through.
And Odell, that's why your shirt says, ask me another question. So talk a little bit about that in regard to your experience.
I didn't realize it at the time, but when, as Kathy said, they thought they meant well. How are you doing? God needed another angel. Don't be mad at God. Not knowing what to say, but was trying to be comforting. This didn't come to break you. Your son didn't want to see you this way. Your son's in a better place. And how those questions. And it got to the point where I said, I can't pretend anymore because the pain was so deep and I had never felt that way before. And I knew that I couldn't carry it. So when people would call me and ask me, how are you doing? I said, ask me another question. And I didn't realize that that's what I was saying. And when they didn't, click, I hung up on them.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have another question. And it was like, oh, goodness. Okay. And so it became my point of my breakthrough and my grief of saying, I'm letting you know that I'm not okay. And if that's your only question for me, then don't ask me a question. But until you have another question, this is it for me because I'm not doing well.
And so you had an epiphany, if you will, by saying, if I am going through this, then I can only imagine other people who have suffered trauma are going through this. And so am I correct in saying you started to look for ways to relieve yourself of this trauma, and that's how different things came about. And then you said, well, you turned to your community, your faith community, the mental health community, and said, this is kind of crazy, for lack of a better term, in the slang sense, that I'm turning to people and they're saying they're not giving real answers, or they are not recognizing what this is. So it is interruptions an outgrowth of that? And talk about how you came up with the name Interruptions in the first place.
So if you're from New Haven, near Kathy's place in the near Hamden area, there was this pizza bar called Slice Pizza Bar. And every Friday night, you would hear gunshots, and you would constantly hear another black man was shot, and you would hear about it Saturday morning because it would happen Friday at 1:30 at night. And that news no longer became, I was no longer numb to the violence in our community because that was the area where my son was murdered. And so it's okay, what can I do to help another mother not wake up the way that I did on that day? And I wanted to find a way to stop that place, stop our young men from being murdered or being shot in that area. So we organized a community organization. We took them to court, challenged their liquor license in court. They lost. They thought they were going to open back up and do BYOB. So you got to pay to get in, pay for a setup, and bring your own alcohol. I said, African American people do that who are professionals. Folks who don't have a job and they drive up with 10 in a car, they don't do that. So they closed. And they had gone from 100 incidents a month to 0 911 calls.
Wow.
In that community. So that was a collective effort to shut that down. And then a friend of mine was teaching at he's a dean at University of Bridgeport, asked me to teach a class, The Pursuit of Happiness. I didn't have a clue on I wasn't happy, and I didn't know what the pursuit of happiness was.
What that
So
looked like, right?
so I have these adults sitting in my classroom, and I'm like, I want to teach you how to, and I'm struggling to find the word. And it's like, how to deal with an interruption when you get it in your life, knowing that we all have something from our childhood, our teenage years, our upbringing, our faith, our history that we can pull into the future, that we can stand on to help us find hope and to get us through tough times. So I didn't want to say deal with grief or death or rape
Mm-hmm.
or any of those. I just labeled it interruptions. And then I went back. We had a meeting with the team, the writing team, Reverend Ina Anderson and Jonathan Berryman. And I said, I got a name for the production. And they're like, she doesn't know how this works. The name doesn't come until later. And Alita Staten was sitting there too. And she said, she doesn't know. She's new to this. And I said, the name is Interruptions. And they were like, oh, we like that.
Think we'll
And
use it.
we think we'll use it. And then a funder was struggling to fund me and looked at my diagram, what I was trying to do. And he said, she's disrupting the silence. And I said, I like
Mm.
that. So he funded me. Because he funded me, I used it. So that's how we got this name, and it speaks for itself.
And we had the red carpet experience. We all got to see the production on film, no less.
Yes.
And it was riveting. I think for me, in watching it, I know I now say to people who are in a traumatic space, how can I help? Is there anything I can do to help you? Because I was one of those people, right, that asked the question, so how you doing?
And
Thinking I'm being helpful, thinking that I'm showing sincerity, but forgetting that after you've heard that the other person, i.e., 50, 60 times, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not okay. And why are you asking me what 10 other people have asked me?
I remember showing up at Kathy's house in the middle of the day, tears just pouring down my face. And she let me in. I sat on her couch and she said, "What happened?" And I said, "People are telling me that I should be over this by now." She turned red. I think her hair stood up. She was like, you know, she leaned in on me. She said, "Who told you that?" I said, I think had I told them their name, she would eject them. And, she gave me some advice that day about time and healing. And I heard it, sat on the couch, drank the water, and I left.
And that's
And
the
so,
space that you have to give people. And
yeah,
and so she knew that this was a safe space that she could do that. Now, if she had, and again, people don't know, right? They don't know how to deal with someone that's gone through that level of trauma. But to allow her just to be. She could come and sit
right.
and she could be on my deck, she could be on the couch, it was a free space for her to be what she needed to be at that moment. And let's say not interrupted. I didn't interrupt her. It was just like a check-in, just to poke my head in. You need something, you want something to drink, you want, something to eat, and that's it. And I think that people learning to do that, but we always want to help, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
that instinct that we always want to
Right.
make it better. But at some point we have to recognize that let a person go through what they need to go through first. And it's interesting, Michelle, I heard you say, "Is there something I can help you with?" And even that, she didn't know what she needed.
Yeah.
Right. So I was very careful not to ask that question because I knew she didn't know what she needed. Who does? Right. I have no clue
Right.
what I need. I'm going through this right now. I'm going to get to the point because I will know what I need. But right now, no, I don't. I just need to
Yeah.
be.
And I think my thing has always been with people, like you said, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so in that moment, I think both parties are kind of stuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're saying that, but you don't know what you can really do,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know how you can assist someone. And I think that was one of the lessons that I got from the production. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what is it? How do you know, open yourself
Mm-hmm.
to really sincerely let that person know, as you did, Kathy, you can come by the house. Do you need me to take you out to the park? Do you need me to just sit with you? What is it that you need?
Mm-hmm.
And be, you know, me, the other person, be in the mindset to receive that
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying something like, "Oh girl, it's not what you need. Oh, you need to come over here. You need to do
Mm-hmm.
this." You
No,
know.
she was great. She used to have an annual New Year's Eve party or Christmas party. I forgot which one it was.
The Christmas Eve party. Yep. Mm-hmm. I
Christmas
think
Eve
it's
party.
like COVID. Wait, what did we have?
Yeah,
I know, I can't
it's
remember.
changed everything,
Right.
right?
And I couldn't, this was after the brain aneurysm, and I couldn't really drive and I couldn't stay out late. And her husband was, "I will come get you and I will bring you home." So it was like, "Oh, okay." But, I want to go and I drive there and there's a whole lot of people. And I'm like, "Oh,"
Ooh.
and Kathy and I love wine. And she has these beautiful wine glasses. So I got a wine glass and I held it in my hand and I said, "I think I'll try the red one." She looked at me
Ooh.
and said, "No, you can have some apple juice.
Mm-hmm.
You have juice. You will not drink any wine."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We need people to see that and to know that in us and that we trust, because it's not even grief. I was still in a traumatic grief and
Mhm.
recovering from a brain aneurysm. And because I was honest, with my mental health issues and my health issues, she took care of me. She said, yes, no. Anybody else would have said, sure, you want red or white? Do you want another one? And that's not what we need. We need people that understand and listen and to say, no, that's not what you're going to have. And then to trust that they care about you enough. And I didn't have any.
No, but the apple juice was great, wasn't it?
Apple juice was great.
Nice and cold.
But Michelle, you had asked to why did I say yes? When Odell had initially approached me, she's told me about the podcast. And of course, you know, if she asks me something, I'm gonna more than likely 98% of chance I say yes, right? But what I said, but I haven't gone through what you went through. This is going to be a very different story. She said, but you did experience a life interruption. And I'm saying, you know, how is that? She says, your daughter has autism. And so I said, but, you know, people listening to that, it's not on the level of losing a child. She said, but that's not what this is about. This is about life interruptions. It's not the story of me losing my son. She said, it's the story of interruptions in people's lives. And so I appreciate her getting me to recognize that it was an interruption in my life. And until she actually had said that, I never thought about it that way. So she too feeds me as well. And so I appreciate her being able to say, no, you did experience an interruption, and you need to talk about that with people so they can hear that.
You know, Kathy says I feed her. No, I have to cook for her. So Kathy,
literally,
Kathy, when I say that spirit, and we're talking spiritually feeding, Kathy called me and said, in the midst of the pandemic, she says, I want a Bible study and I want you to host it online. I said, okay. And I want to watch this show, and we want you to, you know, break it down after it's over. We want you to do it on Zoom, and we want it. She says, and I want it on Tuesdays at 7:00.
And you were like,
okay. And in the midst of a brain aneurysm, you know, recover from a brain aneurysm, that's exactly what I did. You know, we watched the Bible study online, and after it was over, we'd have Bible study conversation and debrief. And she said, and your favorite student, which is her husband, he has his Bible and he's going to be there too. So, and she invited other people. I said,
why not?
So when I say, you know, but that's the friendship. That's who we are.
Yeah.
Help me to understand. I need Kathy. I need this. Odell, I need this. And that's our friendship. And that's what God has put together. So this is who we are.
And so in doing the podcast, who decides what parts? Like, does Kathy recommend the guests, or is it something like a collaborative piece, or, you know, she gets to ask certain questions, and, you know, how do you all work that out?
Go ahead.
Well, it is collaborative, right? Initially, because I leaned more on Odell because it was really her idea, but we talked through the type of ideas. And so in doing that, then we recognize the person's not decided right away. It's the topic and what we want to talk about. And then we back into it to say, well, who would be that type of person to bring that information to the podcast? And so Odell did really most of the reach out, because she has just this broad array of people that have been through her life and have gone through their own traumatic experiences as well. And so bringing people on the podcast, not to just be like the expert, but to be the person to share their story, to say, this is where I started, This is how I got through it, and this is where I am right now. So it really is a collaborative effort in terms of deciding on the topics and then titles as well. As you shared the past podcasts, as God really hear me, and so that if we talk through that, and then I listen to Odell of what she needs to bring to this particular podcast coming up, and then we come up with a great title, because again, sometimes we'll start at the end and go back to
and work it backwards.
Yeah, and work it backwards,
yeah.
right? And and that happens, right? Even in life interruptions. I think how we had initially started out was we love our piece when we're able to tell a guest to say, what happens when your life doesn't happen the way that we had planned. So for both of us, we kind of grew up with the mantra being placed on us that we will go to school, you'll go through high school, you'll go to college. And when you graduate college, you will get married and you will get a job and you will buy the house with the white picket fence and have the 2.5 children and a dog and a cat. And then we worked backwards from there to say, but what happens when that doesn't happen? Right? We were always just taught that that's what's going to happen. And when it doesn't, we're not prepared for that.
Hold that thought. Got to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about the podcast. And then we're going to talk about your mental health advocacy that you have coming up. Okay? This is The Collective. And I have the host of the podcast Interruptions with me, not only talking about their show, but talking about what is upcoming. So we will return after this. We're back on The Collective here on WSME Enlightenment Radio. Positivity is everything, so they tell me. That is the theme of the radio station, really and truly. And if you get the chance and the opportunity, listen. It's such good music, very mature music, house music. I mean, it's just great. It's the little station that could. So WSME DB. And I am back with the podcast hosts of Interruptions, Reverend Odell Cooper and Ms. Kathy Patton. Thank you so much again for being here with me. Kathy is someone who has human resources or human services experience, a longtime person who worked with the state in human services, state of Connecticut. And Odell is the executive producer and writer of Interruptions, as well as ministering in these streets for all of us folk like me. Thank you so much again for being here today. Now, Kathy, when we left, you were saying, talking about the collaboration and working backward, and the fact that especially as Black women, we came from a generation of parents who said, okay, you are now going to step it up, right? You're going to go to college. You're going to marry. You're going to have my grandchildren. You're going to travel. And you're going to live happily ever after. Retire, maybe downsize. By then, me, your mom, you'll maybe build a room for me on the side of the house, all of that. And I know it didn't quite work that way for me. I did one out of the three, but I didn't get to the other parts.
That's funny.
So I understand that, and I know, that we as a community are very dedicated when we get to these levels, if you will, especially back then with education. But there was something that you all brought up in the podcast, Does God Hear Me? Is God hearing me? The fact that our community, and we joke about it at the kitchen table, right? How we're not supposed to tell what goes on in our homes, outside
That's
our
right.
homes. And, that was universal wherever you were from. You could be from Georgia, I could be from Connecticut, you could be from California, and those commonalities of culture would still come into play. You're sitting in that college dorm room and you're joking about the small differences that you might have in California, but everybody knows once the street lights come on, it's time to come home,
That's
right?
right.
That's the commonality in our community. So when you say, especially when it comes to mental health, that there are different things that we are not supposed to discuss outside of our community, you all are having that discussion now.
Yes.
And what has been the reaction from your spiritual community in regard to a discussion consistently on mental health?
I'm going to give that to Odell. Yeah.
It's been slowly received in the church, in the Black church, let's be clear,
Yes.
because we in the Black church view our pastor as the counselor that can solve all of our problems. And since COVID, the increase of deaths and everything that's been going on in this world lately, it has been the pastor's overwhelmed, and the pastors are not. When we went to seminary school, we weren't trained on traumatic counseling.
Mm,
You're trained on pastoral counseling. How do you feel? Your children are doing this, your marriage is a little rocky. Someone, you sat in somebody's pew. So pastoral counseling. Traumatic counseling is very different. They're not prepared for that. And we don't trust the medical system.
mm,
So what do we do? So we don't talk about it. So when the church is getting ready to open back up, we're saying that we need prayer, and you can still see your pastor and you need something else. But in order to talk about the something else, where do you go? We'll tell our hairdresser, our barber,
right,
we'll
right.
tell, Facebook everything that's going on with us, but we won't tell our doctors. And we don't know how to support one another like Kathy supported me. No, you don't
Mm,
need anything to drink. No, I think something else is going on. So our conversations that we've been having have gotten people to open up and go, wow, I didn't think about it that way. We had a young man who's a chef in Harlem who was on our show, and he was talking about his life interrupted. We've had a host of people come on our show and have shared advice on how to move forward, what is interruptions, and you have to talk about it, because if you don't talk about it, you can, when I say die, I mean that spiritually and physically,
yes,
because stress will kill you.
yes.
Bottling up everything. You can die of a broken heart. You can die of stress. And these are symptoms inside of us. So, how do we get at that? So, are transparent. Kathy talks about raising a daughter with autism and all the stereotypes, things that have come her way.
Mm,
And I hope I'm answering the question. I've been transparent with my story, which is challenging and difficult to do, but it's necessary. So use me, look at me, talk about my story.
yeah.
And my story is my story, but it's a case study. So use it as a case study. Find some behaviors that are happening in your house and let's talk about it. How can you move forward?
And Kathy, what would your approach be in trying to assist someone who, because you talked about your experience with Odell, right?
Yeah.
But when you are sitting there and you're listening to other people's stories, what comes to mind for you as to how you, with a different type of experience, but you've done things in the church, but you have kind of a different background. So
Mm-hmm.
when you hear these stories, how has it changed your approach? Because you did something wonderful for Odell,
Mm-hmm.
but when you said that it's not just having someone in Odell's shoes who experience an interruption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you see helping people cope?
So thank you. So the one thing that, and Odell is absolutely right. We've been talking about, I think what happened with us is that we were talking about interruptions, and somewhere down the line, the word mental health came up. And so we're saying, but that's exactly what we're talking about. We are talking about mental health. Now it seems to be this very popular term, right?
Yeah.
Everyone seems to, right? It's like you need another t-shirt, right? Because now everyone is jumping on the bandwagon. But for Odell and I, it's like, but we've been talking about this. Exactly what we're saying is being opening up, talking about what you have been through, understanding. And Odell has said now the church is trying to deal with these types of issues that they're not necessarily equipped to deal with. But all along, we haven't been equipped to deal with that in the church, not to that degree, because Michelle, as you said, we grew up and it was like, well, just, we don't talk about this outside the house, goodness forbid. Whatever happens in this house stays in this house. And that's become very unhealthy for us. And I recognized that very early on when I had to deal with, my husband and I had to deal with our daughter having a child with autism. But I think what enlightened me was that my mother, God rest her soul, she was in the school system. And so she understood how to access services. So that helped us to begin to able to have access services. And for the first few appointments we would go to in terms of getting her connected with education, my mother would do the talking because I did nothing but sit there and cry. I literally sat through the entire meeting and would just cry, because you have this group of people on the other side of the table that are trying to tell you what's best for your child. And
Right.
you don't, and you're saying, but I just want my child to be a child. And so what you're saying is very technical for me, and it's not sinking in. And so from that experience, I learned from there to be able to talk for myself, to advocate for my child what I wanted her to have, what I knew was going to be the best thing for her. And I think it came to light when I was in church one Sunday, and my daughter had been recognized for something, and everyone made a really big deal about it because they all knew her. She's very social. While she's autistic, she's very social, and everybody in the church knew her. And so they made this really big deal. And there was this woman that came up to me after, and she said, "What did you do for your daughter?" And it was just the way she asked me that I recognized that. I said, and I said it to Odell, I said, I think people see what my husband and I have done with my daughter and think that this was easy to get here. They don't see the nights, the sleepless nights, and the tears and the prayers, and they don't see the worry, but they see the end result. And so she said, because, and she shared her story. She said, when I had a daughter and I knew she had mental health issues, I was a single parent and I put her in a facility, and now I see your daughter and I feel guilty. And I said, that's not the story that I want to be telling. That
Right.
isn't. That's, you
Right.
should never feel guilty for a decision you made that you thought was best for your child and you at the time. So please don't feel guilty by seeing what we went through with our daughter. And from there, other people, it was just a natural progression. I think, as Odell said, God just places you somewhere where you don't even have to seek people out. They are going to seek you out. And that's what happened. That parents started to seek me out, my husband out, to say, what did you do? How did you do it? And started counseling parents through, because it is a traumatic experience, because your 2.5 children, it's great when I hate to use the word mainstream, right? But when your 2.5 children are mainstreamed and what the society deems as regular children, but then when one has an issue, we're not prepared to deal with that. And so now, how do I do that? How do I deal with that? And that's what we do in terms of reaching out to parents, or parents really reaching out to us, and then they've told parents about us. And then just, I've even gone to meetings with parents when they have to meet with an agency because they're not able. I remember not being able to speak for myself, right? And so I want to do that for them. But the funny thing is that Odell and I have been talking about this, and now it has a fancy title of talking about mental health. But it's like, but this is what this is what we've been talking about. And at some point in our podcast, we talked about and revealing and sharing stories. But at some point, I think in one of our meetings, it was like an epiphany to say, Odell, okay, we both talked about the trauma, but now we not move our journey to healing. Now this is you talk about it, but now you have to connect yourself to that person, that professional that can help you. As Odell shared, she went for counseling. She's open about that. I did not go for counseling because I didn't think about counseling for myself. And then B, in my mind, I was like, when do I have time? When did I have time? But I should have found time for that.
Make time for yourself.
Make time
and
for yourself.
That's a very real mental health piece.
Yes.
Making time.
That's very real. Make time for yourself.
Kathy and I, listening to all the guests that we've had on our show who have come through and shared stories after stories. We've talked about trauma and interruptions and resiliency. And Reverend Starworth was still one of our favorites, that whole show. I hope he sees this, because we asked him, for being a Black pastor, what do you do when you don't get the call and response from your congregation, or, what keeps you going? And he said the first time he had to preach, and during COVID, and there's no one no one's in the sanctuary. He said the sanctuary got bigger and bigger. He said, and then when he finished, he can turn the mic off and go home. He said, nobody said to me, your suit's too tight, it was too hot, it was too cold. So he said he told them, when you all come back, there's no complaining. I've had a year and a half of no complaints. So I don't want to hear it. So he's adjusted, and we're like, so now when I went to church, I said, I got nothing to say. I'm not going to say.
We're just going to listen.
Where's that? Where's the praise and worship? Well, how come that didn't happen? I'm good. So Kathy and I said, it's time. And it just hit both of us. And our next guest coming on this week is Anola Aird. And we're talking about healing. And then we are going to take a break from our podcast, and we are coming into the community. We're taking everything that we've said, we've heard on our podcast, and we're now going to teach.
So talk a little bit about that. What is that going to look like? And is it called Interruptions as well?
Well, the program is called Let's Talk. Because that's what Kathy and I've been doing. Let's talk.
Very simplistic, and it hits right there, right? You definitely know we're going to talk.
And it's to teach everyday peer-to-peer how to be a mental health advocate for mental health. And it may sound complicated or hard, but it's just like Kathy did with me. No, her husband, I'll come pick you up because you can't drive. I'll drive you home. No, you shouldn't be drinking that. I think you've had enough. I think it's time for you to go. Or when I say to you, Michelle, do you think I can ride my bicycle to your house? And you go, look at Kathy's face. No. You'll get halfway and no. But it's being able to recognize the everyday behaviors of mental health in our lives that we've overlooked. So it's looking at the production that's online. We've gotten over 1,000 views so far, and Kathy and I have been on conversations. So it's looking at the production. Clifford Beers, Alice Forrester, and Reverend Streets have helped me to identify
And
mental
Reverend
health.
Streets is who?
Oh, Reverend Jerry Streets. He is the pastor of Dixwell Congregation on Dixwell Avenue. And he is a pastor and clinical specialist. He's like, how can I help you? And when you get people from from their status to say, how can I help you? Let's Kathy and I know that we're on to something.
Mm.
Adrian Parkman, where Kathy works at the workplace, said, I'll be back. How can I help you to help people to reinvent themselves for employment? So awesome, awesome guests. So we're going to take everything that we have, I rolled it all into this program. So you watch Interruptions. Kathy and I will be training facilitators to go out and to have small groups and to observe mental health behaviors in the production, talk about them, educate them so everybody's on the same page. What is trauma? What is post-traumatic stress disorder? What is post-traumatic slave syndrome? What is depression? What are these behaviors and how do they appear in our lives? And then let's talk about you. Let's talk about you. When was the last time someone actually asked a young person, what are you feeling? How did you feel when your friend was shot? Who asked you about that? Who do you get to talk to? Because you're a young man, you're not supposed to talk about these things. You're a young woman.
Right.
You're going to be viewed as being weak. So we want to get you to talk about what that feels like and be able to give you a platform towards healing. And healing looks different for everybody.
Correct.
If it's counseling, if it's you're in a bad relationship, if it's your attitude, your lack of openness, or you need resources. So whatever it is that you need, this is what we're going to do. In my previous career, I trained adults and Kathy trained youth. So she's an excellent youth person. So I said, Kathy, let's do a training. So we have youth facilitators that we're going to start training on June 21st. We have 5 organizations that have said yes to the training. They're sending their youth facilitators. They will send their facilitators to training. Kathy and I will train them, and they will go into their community with their population and provide training.
And so how long is the training?
The facilitator training is 3 days.
Okay.
And so in the day, we have more, it's 3 hours in the daytime. Each session is 3 hours, and the evening session is 2.5. So in the evening, because we know you probably work during the day, so you
Right.
have some homework to do. So it's a little bit more aggressive, but that's the facilitator training that we're using. So we have 3 churches, 2 communities. We have Bridgeport, we have New Haven, hopefully we'll have Milford. And we're going to train facilitators to provide training by October, and we're going to evaluate it and see how it helps people to start caring for one another and non-judging.
So Kathy, what do you hope people will come away from this with? What do you see as an outcome, a great outcome, or at least a healing outcome?
I think learning to recognize feelings that they may have been suppressing for a long time. Also teaches them how to be advocates in their community for services that we may not necessarily have right now. And in their community, in their churches, whatever organization that they're connected with, to have conversations about what is really needed. And then recognizing too that maybe we don't have that expertise level here right now. And should we look to get that level of expertise before we start running off and creating all of these services, make sure we have people in place that are trained to really facilitate the services in the appropriate way. And also not being afraid to say, we don't have it. We don't have it here, but we are willing to make sure that we do go out and receive it, look for it, and see what looks appropriate for, they know their communities better. Whatever that community looks like, But then also bringing it out. And that's the formal piece of it, right? But I think what's really important is the informal piece, that people are starting to talk about it and really feel comfortable, so that it's not this stigma of having someone in your family that was shot. Because, you know, first thing, while people recognize who Odell was, what's the first thing that people really thought when they heard that her son was shot? What was he involved in? Absolutely nothing. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But learning how to not ask those questions, let's not be so judgmental. That's what has stopped people from even talking about issues of mental health, or talking about the fact that you have a child in your house that needs extra services. You know, where that hard conversation happens is in the house, because you have one parent who says, yes, I recognize our child needs services, but then you have the other one, oh, they're going to be all right. They're fine. They don't need anything. Just send them back to school. Put them, you know.
And don't bring other people into our lives.
Don't bring other people.
On. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We had the guy from Ice to Beef. What was his name?
You know better than that.
Chaz. I know. And it's 9 o'clock in the morning for me. We had Chaz on, and Chaz triggered something, which is a part of this mental health program. And we knew we needed to address it to youth at risk. So how do you help a youth out of all the shootings that's been going on? How do you help someone recognize the impact that you have on a family's life when you pull a trigger? And you may see you're standing on my corner, you stepped on my sneakers, you dissed my girlfriend, you know, you're selling weed on my block that's not your block, and you take a life. And we want them to see the impact that you have on a family's life when you pull a trigger. And all the mothers that are out there, and parents and siblings that are dealing with all these shootings every day and have lost someone. A mother said, someone just stole my golden light. You know, I know what she's feeling.
That's right.
But the people who pulled the trigger, how can we stop them from doing that and realize that you're impacting families in a way that we won't recover for a very long time? And you're going to interrupt not just our night, our employment, our health, our social life, our abilities, our daughters, your sons, our children. So we want to be able to catch that young group, and whether they're in the church, because we have youth facilitators, there are folks that go to church and folks that don't go to church. So we've got the saints, the ain'ts, adults, we've got the young adults, and we're going to train facilitators to go out, and you know who your community is, and teach them and to help them. So if I think about how do I help another mother from not waking up the way that I did, then let's catch the youth to help them to understand and let them see it. This is what you do to a family.
And also, Michelle, to get the community social media to look at issues of mental health, that it shouldn't be a stigma. And through COVID, there was a story that came out that infuriated me. I got right on the phone and told Odell, and I contacted those news stations too to tell them how infuriated I was. There was a story of a man that was obviously homeless, and he broke into a bank. He went in through the teller's window.
I saw that. Yeah.
Right. And he didn't steal any money. He wasn't going in to steal any money. He was going in to heat up a Hot Pocket in the break room of the bank. He saw a microwave in there, wanted to heat up a Hot Pocket. And what they filmed was the police, who had already handcuffed him, pushing him into a police cruiser, and having a reporter ask this man that obviously had mental health issues, asking him, was it all worth it? And I'm saying, was it all worth it? And so the man's reaction was to heat up a Hot Pocket. Of course it was worth it. He had a homeless person who was hungry, who had mental health issues. And this is how the media chose to portray this man. And I was infuriated. And those are the type of things that I think all of us have a responsibility to address, that no, we're not going to cover a story like that, because you needed to fill 3 minutes. And so you took someone that had a mental health issue and looked at it as if he was this bank robber. He wasn't a bank robber. He was hungry, homeless, had mental health issues. He saw a microwave, and that was it. And yet you used that as part of your news story for the evening. And that for the cycle, right? And that was just not okay. So opening these conversations to get people to recognize, no, we don't need to portray these type of issues in a negative light. It's not all right. It's not. We keep, as Odell kind of opened up, hearing about, we got used to it. We were numb to it. Every other day, black man shot. No, we need to not be used to hearing those stories.
Yes. Well, ladies, we are out of time. And I am going to make a point of privilege. I'm going to tell a little story about Odell in this bike ride piece. So, Kathy, if you know Odell does, as long as she's been in New Haven, does not know New Haven. Okay. So when I lived in Westville, I lived like maybe 8 minutes from Odell, right? Okay. No more than 10. Odell could never find my house. Never. Okay. On the flip side, we go to Hartford and she go, oh, turn here. And that's the one way. Don't do that. And I'm like, how do you know Hartford but don't know where you live?
That's funny.
So we would giggle about it. So one day she said, I'm coming to your house. I said, oh, Lord, that means I got to stand down all the way down at the other corner and do this so that she will see me, right? And she made it to the house. I was so impressed. I took pictures. I actually took pictures of her at my house saying she got it right. But here's the kicker.
5 blocks.
Here's the kicker. So she says to me, it's a nice day. I think I'm going to ride my bike. I said, where are you riding your bike to? She said, your house. I'm on the phone like, I said, Odell, before the brain aneurysm, you couldn't get to my house. So now you want to put on a helmet and ride from Westville to the Dixwell area on a bike. I don't think so, girl. That's for another day. We can ride bikes along Farmington Canal, but you are not going to try to ride from Westville down Whaley Avenue. Cross it over to Dixwell Avenue.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for telling her no. I love it. Thank you for telling her no.
Like I said, if you didn't have it together before the aneurysm.
That's right.
All I could see was her calling me saying, Turner, I think I'm close, but I'm not sure. You need to come get me. Well, what's there, Odell? I think I'm by Hill House.
I have gone walking when I had the brain aneurysm in my neighborhood and got lost. And I had to call Jackie. I said, Jackie, I'm lost. She's like, you're on foot. She said, what street are you on? I looked up. I said, Jedwin. She said, it's your street.
Oh, my God.
And it was a circle, so I didn't know.
Yeah, you didn't get the circle.
She said, Mom, just keep walking. It's eventually you're going to end up here. Just keep walking. And she just shakes her head. She goes, I'm glad you have people that tell you no.
Yes.
Yeah, it was cute though. It was cute because she was just so determined. I'm going to ride my bike.
Well, really. I love it. And again, thank you for telling her no. She's okay with that now.
Yes, she is. She really is. Reverend Odell Montgomery Cooper, Kathy Patton, co-host, collaborative forces behind Interruptions, the podcast, and now a community reckoning and Let's Talk, where they are going out and spreading the word about mental health through training and healing. So I thank you both so much for being on the collective today. My producer's going to kill me because we way over, but I just wanted to share that story and wish you all the best of luck, because it is really fantastic what you're doing. And I hope that it does catch fire in the community. We, as the African American community, need this so much. So I thank you.
Thank
I thank
you.
you.
Thank you for having us.
And you have been listening to The Collective here on WSME Enlightenment Radio. We stream, baby. Positivity is everything.